when I decided I wanted to win a high school state basketball tournament. Apparently this is the day for Fashion Challenge middle school photos. Just correct. Third day. The way I know I was 8 years old is that was 1976, and that was the first year that Minnesota had an official state high school basketball tournament for girls. Now, those of you in the room who know my father Jerry will not be surprised to learn I grew up playing football and basketball and baseball from the time I could walk. Basketball was my passion. And I played and played and played. And because it was 1976, most of the time I was playing with boys. And so I learned to play fast and hard and aggressive. And I was happy when I made a shot, and I was upset when I missed. And I got angry when the refs made a bad call. And then I got to high school. And for the first time, I was playing with and against girls all the time. I remember one game in particular. I went up to block another girl's shot, clean block, and I grab the ball, and I go ready to run down the court, and I hear a whistle behind me. I turn around, the ref is pointing at me. I was like, are you blind? It was a clean block. He was not amused. He went over to the scorer's table and called my fourth foul. One more foul and I'd be out of the game. So a little while later, I find myself on a clean, fast break. I'm headed down the court to make a layup. Everybody else is behind me, and I go up to make the layup, and it bobbles off the rim. I miss. And in my frustration, I continue forward, and I slam the wall in front of me, really upset with myself for missing the shots. And behind me, I hear a whistle. I'm like, wait a minute, nobody's near me. I didn't foul anybody, nobody fouled me. What's going on? Turn around. Yes, he is in fact pointing at me. And this time, he's going, T for technical. Technical foul meant not only was it my fifth foul I was out of the game, but my opposing team got 2 free shots. And I got sent to the bench to stew. And I'm still stewing 24 hours later at my family dinner table. Now, my parents were pretty used to me ranting and raving about things by then, but I ranted about how unfair all this was. I mean, clearly they didn't believe a girl could block a shot, and that's why I was getting called for fouls all the time. And, you know, the boys all the time express frustration, or they celebrate after they make something, and nobody calls technical fouls on them. This is just unjust, and they're treating me differently because I'm a girl. And they agreed with me. And then they said, you know, you might catch more flies with honey. Maybe if you treated the refs differently, they'd treat you differently. I said, what, are you crazy? They're the refs. They're wrong, I'm right. Forget it, no way. And then they said, well, what's more important? Being right or winning the game? Okay, I had to think about that one because winning the game was the most important thing. Winning the state basketball tournament was the most important thing. And as awful and uncomfortable and terrible as it felt, I decided I would at least experiment with this crazy notion. So I started going to games, and when I would go out in the center court as the captain, shake hands with the referees, I would smile, and I would shake hands, and I would chit-chat. And then when I was on the sideline, in the middle of the game, and I had an opportunity, I would talk with them. And when they inevitably made a bad call, because they always do, I did my best to stay calm as I made my point. Now, I cannot tell a lie, especially in this room. I was not perfect at this, but I was better. And I was just better enough that I started not fouling out of so many games, not getting so many technical fouls called. And in my senior year, we went the whole season with only 1 loss. And we won the games we needed to win to get to the state tournament, and we won the first 2 games of the state tournament, and we got to the championship game. And I still remember that game, at the very end of the game, with 1 second left on the clock, the game is stopped. And our opponent is shooting a free throw. And it's 50-47, and we're ahead. And it dawns on me that we're going to win. And I just sat in that moment because what was fabulous was I was still on the court. I hadn't even had to think about the refs, right? I was still on the court. I hadn't fouled out of the game. So I got to, when the buzzer went off, enjoy the amazing experience of winning the state tournament in front of thousands of fans, and the band is playing, and it's on television, and we're carrying the trophy around everywhere. And so I came out of high school with this just invincible identity of myself as a leader. Several years later, I found myself in my first management job at Earthlink Network. Oh, I'm sorry. I took the pause. Here's the picture. Because one of the wonderful things about this picture for me is that when we won that game, it was March 21st, 1987, and it was so meaningful that my friend Tammy and I, on the right there, still talk to each other every year on March 21st. And so I got this amazing experience of what it was like to be a leader and bring people together towards a purpose, and I marched out into the world with that identity. And several years later, I found myself at Earthlink Network in Pasadena in my first management job. And it was the internet boom. Things were going crazy. Everybody's watching their stock options thinking they're going to be instant millionaires. Didn't happen to me, but everybody else was thinking they're going to be instant millionaires. And we're hiring 30 and 40 people a week, and I'm in charge of the team that gets all of these people trained every week. In the middle of all this, my boss gives me a call and says, I want to take you to lunch. I think, great! He wants to tell me what a great job I'm doing. So we meet at Benihana, and he says to me, you know, your staff have been complaining. What? What's going on? I said, yes, your staff have been complaining. You're not nice enough. And I've noticed that too. You need to change that. My heart just went into the pit of my stomach. You've got to be kidding me. I'm moving mountains, and I know already that I'm nicer than my male colleague down the hall, who's constantly yelling at his employees and sending them scurrying under the cubicles. Or the other guy down the other end of the hall who locks himself in his office, right, and never interacts with his team. What do you mean nicer? It's like, I don't know. Your staff's complaining. You're not nice enough. You need to change that. So I have to admit, my confidence took a hit. My identity took a hit. And I floundered at that job for a little while, trying to figure out what he meant, trying to figure out what to do differently. And eventually, I got passed over for a promotion for a male colleague, and I left. And it got me wondering, why was it possible for me to build this amazing leader identity in high school, and why was it so hard out in the real world? Because I figured if I could answer those questions, then I might also be able to answer, how do we make it possible for girls and women to build that strong, authentic sense of identity as a leader? And so I geeked out. As Renee said, I have some geekdom in my diplomas from the University of Chicago, so I did geek out, and I started looking at all the research. And the fascinating thing is it's really only in the last 10, 15 years that neuroscience, cognitive science, social science, has really pulled together all of the information we need to understand the answers to these questions. One of the folks that I really got a lot out of is Amy Cuddy at Harvard Business School. And Cuddy and her colleagues looked at how do we form first impressions of other people. And what they found is that we form first impressions of other people based on two primary variables. And those two variables are warmth and competence. Warmth is evaluated first. If I meet you, I'm going to evaluate your warmth first, and it counts for more in the overall evaluation. Evolutionarily speaking, I want to know first, can I trust you not to kill me? And only then do I want to know, can you actually help me kill the mammoth for dinner? Okay? Interesting thing is that warmth and competence are inversely related. So like the seesaw here, if I evaluate you initially as warm, then I think you're less competent. If I evaluate you as competent, I assume you are less warm. One or the other, but not both. All of this happens at the subconscious level. We aren't even aware we're making evaluations because our brain uses shortcuts. We don't have time every time we meet somebody to go through the whole checklist, right, of whether I trust them or not. And so our subconscious has developed to make those evaluations like this. And one of the ways our subconscious does that is we use subconscious stereotypes. And we think of stereotypes as always being bad. Stereotypes are really nothing more than our brain's shortcut for getting through life. And at the subconscious level, we have stereotypes that help us make this evaluation. So for example, our brains use racial and cultural stereotypes. Our brains, at the subconscious level, tell us that Italian Americans are warm and that Asian Americans are competent. Now, I'll bet this room can guess what the subconscious stereotypes are for men and women. So women, what's the default subconscious stereotype? Warm or competent? Shout it out.
Warm.
And for men, what's the default stereotype? Warm or competent?
Competent.
And you guys get 100%, I'm not surprised.
Competent and warm.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that warmth and competence gets seen through those stereotypes, and as a result, women get treated differently. Because how people see us at the subconscious level impacts how they treat us out in the world. So for example, negative warmth coming from a woman is judged far more harshly. See, for example, if somebody decides to argue with a referee all the time. And because women are expected to be warm by other people's subconscious, they can be already nicer than their male colleagues, but they're not nice enough. Okay? How many of you would like to be seen as warm and competent? As human beings, I think that's what we want, right? What we're going to talk about is how we do that and what the struggles are with that. Here's my handy-dandy visual aid to how these stereotypes play out for women. Now, take a good look. I'm going to start up in the upper right-hand corner with Ariel the Little Mermaid. She's our poster child for being perceived as warm and incompetent. Even my daughter said, oh, it's definitely Ariel in that corner, she's stupid. When people perceive you as warm and incompetent, the emotion they feel towards you is pity, and as a result, the behavior they have towards you, they'll help you, but only out of charity. I mean, think about it. Ariel, our little mermaid, gives up her voice, right, to get on land to get her prince, and even the prince only helps her because he feels bad for her. She's lost and she doesn't have a voice. In the bottom left-hand corner is Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. She's our illustration of cold and competent. When people perceive you as cold and competent, the emotion they feel towards you is envy, and the behavior they have towards you is to help you, but only out of their own self-interest, because they don't really trust you. Maleficent is the most powerful, beautiful fairy in the entire Sleeping Beauty story. Nobody wants to help her. She doesn't get invited to the party, right? That's why she gets all pissed off. And then the raven is only helping her because he's afraid he's going to get killed otherwise. That's the ultimate in self-interest. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have Cinderella's stepsisters, cold and incompetent. When people see you as cold and incompetent, the emotion they feel towards you is contempt, and they're not only not willing to help you, they're actually willing to harm you. I mean, admit it. How many of us would have locked the two Cinderella stepsisters in the room so they couldn't get out when the prince came? Right? In the upper left-hand corner, we have Mulan. When people perceive you as warm and competent, the emotion they feel towards you is admiration, and the behavior they have towards you is they will actively help you reach your goals. They will go out of their way to help you reach their goals. Now, how many of you have had a leader in your life, or whom, anywhere in your life, you would have gone above and beyond to help them achieve the goals they laid out? Shout out some names. Who?
Julie.
Yeah, just Julie? Who? Just shout out names. I want to hear about these leaders. Who are their names?
Sherry.
Right? Pretty special people that can get there. And that's where we want to lead from, because when we're seen as warm and competent, we get the kind of behavior from other people that brings them along in pursuit of a shared purpose. Now Mulan, if you remember from that story, she sacrifices herself, warm, to go into the army instead of her elderly father. And then she goes off and becomes a skilled warrior. And she spends 2/3 of the story pretending to be a man. And that's often the advice we get. Just act like a man to be a leader. But it doesn't work, so we might as well be ourselves. And it doesn't work because people are already viewing us through different subconscious lenses than they view men. The same behavior from us is going to get a different reaction than the same behavior coming from a man. For example, research has found that when women negotiate for higher pay, they actually suffer socially. I mean, it's a bad thing for them. It's not the case for men. Men don't feel that thing when they negotiate for higher pay. When women talk in a job interview about their successes and their qualifications for the job, they can actually lower their chances of getting hired. Because it triggers the competence, dings them on the warm. Same behaviors, different reactions. So acting like a man isn't going to work. And plus it doesn't feel authentic. So we have to figure out a different way to go at this. This is me, my husband, and our daughter, Catherine. One of the things that happened to me is that when I went along at Earthlink and I left that job, I decided, time to have a baby. Why not? And I marched in after Catherine was born to my new job. I'd taken a new job at a startup. After my maternity leave, I went in, and on the very same day, I got laid off. So now I'm a few months before I've been gunning for a new promotion, and now I have no job. I'm now caring for a newborn 24/7. About this time, my husband David and I went to a University of Chicago alumni event. And I actually was pretty excited about this because since I'd had a baby and just gotten laid off, this was in fact the first time I was going to get dressed up and put on the heels and go out and interact with grown-ups again. And so David and I took Catherine down to his parents' house and left her sleeping in their arms, and we drove into downtown Los Angeles, and we went to a swanky hotel, and we went into the big ballroom and got our glasses of wine, got our hors d'oeuvres, and went up to the first cluster of fellow alumni to chit-chat with them. And as is normal at these kinds of events, the first question came. And the person said, well, so Kristin and David, what are you doing now? And my husband David said, oh, I'm a first-year associate at a law firm here in downtown. And I said, I'm at home caring for our newborn. And the person said, oh, okay, that's interesting. David, which law firm are you working for? Oh, you know what? Do you know so-and-so? I can introduce you to him down the road. And I was like, hey, what about me? All night long, I was completely ignored. And I cried the whole way home to my husband. Because I still saw myself as the same person I'd been before I had my daughter. But everyone was treating me completely differently. And it messed with my sense of who I was. Because the fascinating thing about all of these subconscious stereotypes is we like to think that we're in charge of our own identities. I was always somebody who said, I don't care what anybody else thinks, I'm my own person, right? But psychology knows our subconscious actually cares an awful lot about what other people think of us and how they treat us. That's how we form our identities. And so as soon as people started treating me differently as a mother, it started to mess with my sense of who I was. Mothers have a whole other layer on my grid here. Because mothers are seen as even warmer than women without children and even less competent. I had a friend, Barbara, who went to a big technology conference right after she had her first. And she said the technology keynote speaker got up and was going to talk about some complicated topic. And the first thing he said was, don't worry, I'll explain it so that my mother could understand it. And it was the first time that she heard that phrase when she was herself a mother. And she realized he was safe in assuming everybody else in the room knew that mothers were kind of stupid. Mothers are viewed as less competent by their employers than women without children. Mothers are less likely to be hired and offered lower paying salaries than women without children. Mothers are seen as less competent by their employers than they themselves were before they had kids. Again, all at the subconscious level. Okay? And this can make it a real challenge to form a sense of self and a sense of identity. Because, make no mistake, leadership is a process of identity. Leadership is a process by which we go out into the world and we experiment with leadership behaviors like leading a meeting or giving a presentation or managing employees. And if we get a positive reaction, well, then we can incorporate it into our sense of self and our sense of who we are. But if we get negative reactions, we won't do it, because our psyche will protect us from doing stuff that eats at our identity. And because leadership is a process of identity, and women and mothers get so many conflicting signals about who they are from other people, it's extremely difficult to build that unified, authentic sense of yourself as a leader. That we need to be effective leaders and be seen as woman confident. So now I want to invite you guys into the conversation, because I've explained the problem and the challenge. I want you to talk about that before I talk about some of the solutions. So I'm going to give you 3 to 4 minutes at your table. I'd like you to get in groups of about 3. If your table's bigger than 3, then break it down. And in your group of 3, I'd like you to share a story with each other about a time you experienced or observed a challenge related to these stereotypes. It could be at work, it could be at home, doesn't matter where, because being a leader, that's about influencing people to come along with you, no matter what sphere of life you're in. Okay, so group of 3, everybody gets to share a story and connect it to the stereotypes. Ready, set, go. So what do we do, right? Because I did get to the point in the research where I was like, okay, what does the research say about how to make it possible? And it turns out that my high school experience was a case study in how to support girls developing leadership identities. And the first thing I had going for me was my family dinner table. My family dinner table up on Mulberry Street with my mom and my dad and my 2 sisters was my safe place where everybody loved me, nobody was going to judge me, and I could process what was happening to me, even if it meant ranting and raving and about how frustrated I was. I could figure out what experiments I wanted to try, and I could go out into the world and try those experiments, and when they failed miserably, I could come back to my family dinner table and figure out what it meant. Was it me? Was it them? Was it some of these stereotypes? Like, what was going on? And what should I try next? And women in particular need this kind of safe space in order to develop leadership identity. Sometimes you get people complaining, well, men don't need a special group. Why do the women get a special group? Right? Women get a special group because guess what? We operate in a world where the world doesn't see us as leaders at the subconscious level, and even sometimes we have trouble seeing ourselves as leaders. Men operate in a world where being a leader, everybody sees them that way, and they see themselves that way. So we need a place to form leadership as part of our core identity. The other thing I had going for me is I had a very clear purpose: winning a high school state basketball tournament, winning the game. And that purpose was important enough and compelling enough to me to do really uncomfortable things like being nice to referees, or at least to experiment with them. Right? The purpose was compelling enough that I was willing to take the risks, because becoming a leader is all about taking risks and experimenting, and then hopefully over time, enough of those experiments are successful that they become part of who you are. I have a client, a coaching client at a big higher education institution who was really struggling getting negative feedback from her boss. It was a very political environment. He said she just wasn't handling the politics well. So I went in to talk to her, and she said, yeah, I'm frustrated, I know I'm not handling the politics, but I just hate them. It's fake, and it's forced, and it feels so inauthentic. I just want to do the work, right? I see a few people identifying with this. And I said to her, okay, well, talk to me about what your purpose here as a leader is at this institution. She was very clear on this. She said, oh, I want to fundamentally transform the external reputation of this institution so it can have the impact on the world that it wants to have. I was like, great, that is so compelling. I said, who do you need on your side in order to make that happen? She said, oh, I need this and this and this person, 3 people. Without them, I'm not going to get anywhere, and if I have them, I'm definitely going to succeed. And I said, well, okay, how about we experiment? How about you go have coffee with each of them? And she said, no, I don't want to, I'm really too busy, I don't like that one guy. All of the excuses we all put up when we don't want to do something that's uncomfortable or risky. And I said, but your purpose is really compelling to you. You're willing to just go have coffee. It's just coffee. She said, okay. So she went out and had coffee with each of the folks, and she came back to talk to me, because I was effectively her family dinner table space, where she could talk about this. And I said, how'd it go? And she lit up. She was like, oh my God, it was so amazing. I talked about my purpose, talked about what I wanted to achieve, talked about what role they might be able to play in it. And it was just a conversation. And I said, so it didn't feel like politics? She said, no, it just felt like having a conversation and building a relationship with somebody. I was like, do you think you could do more of it? She said, yeah, I think I could. Having that kind of purpose will pull you when it's time to do the tough stuff, when it's time to experiment. Now, having a clear purpose is not easy. I don't want to put that out there as something everybody should be able to pull out of their back pocket. I will confess to you, I still struggle with what my purpose is, how to articulate it, how it changes in different life stages, right? And it's another reason we need that family dinner table space. Because thinking in our own heads about what our purpose is sometimes really tough. Getting other people to help us think about what that purpose is, clarify it over time, go out and experiment, and then come back and clarify the purpose, really powerful. The third thing I had going for me in high school is I got some really good lessons in how to tackle subconscious bias. No, that's what I was getting at the time, but that's what I was getting. And subconscious bias is not conscious. And I say that out loud because subconscious bias is different than conscious bias. And so we have to tackle it differently. So I remember when I was a freshman in high school, and I looked around and I realized that at all of the boys' high school basketball games, both sides of the bleachers were pulled out in expectation of a very big crowd. The high school band played at every single boys' basketball game, and the concession stand was open at every single boys' basketball game. Well, for the girls, our games only had one half of the bleachers pulled out. The band never played, and there was no concession stand. And I thought this was absolutely unfair and wrong, and I was going to do something about it. So I drew up a petition. That was my solution. And I drew up a petition, and I put all kinds of angry language at the top about how unfair and unjust this was. And I marched around at lunchtime and strong-armed all of my friends into signing this petition. I was pretty sure in hindsight they thought I was Maleficent, and it was definitely in their self-interest to sign the petition when something bad would happen to them. And with my petition in hand, I marched into my principal's office, and I sat down and I said, Mr. Zimmerman, this is wrong and you need to fix it. And Mr. Zimmerman sat back in his chair, wonderful man that he was. He said, you know, you could have just come and talked to me. Really? He's like, yeah, when you attack, then I feel like I have to defend. But if you come at me with a problem that we can work together to solve, then we're on the same team. You know something about team, right? Yeah, I guess. Okay. When you attack, they defend. The challenge with the bias we're facing now is because it's at the subconscious level, we can't attack it in the same way. When we attack people as being discriminatory, they dig in and defend because, frankly, at the conscious level, most people aren't anymore. The bias we are dealing with largely today is subconscious. We don't have the written policies on the books that say we don't hire women. We don't have a written policy that says we pay women teachers less. But we have a lot of subconscious bias out there that ends up with the same result. And the trick with subconscious bias is the first thing we have to do is make people aware that subconscious bias exists, because by making them aware, we make them right. Once you tell people that not only are they not wrong, we are all biased. They're not biased, we are all biased. It's part of the human condition. And when we are all biased, then we are on the same team trying to figure out a solution to the problem, instead of pitting ourselves against each other. Now, when Mr. Zimmerman and I set about solving this problem after I sheepishly acknowledged that yes, we could be on the same team if he wanted to, we went about solving this and we pulled out the bleachers for the girls' games, right? And we had the band play, so the Cooper Fight song was playing, there was music, and all the kids, of course, in the band had to come to the games, and then the concession stands were open, and so the smell of popcorn is wafting through the lobby, and all of a sudden it was sending all of these subconscious cues to everybody else that the girls' games were worth going to. We didn't tell people they had to come to the games. We changed the environment and all the cues. And I did my part. I tried to help us start winning. And the games became worth going to. And this is the trick with subconscious bias, is figuring out ways to interrupt the bias warmly. And these kinds of interruptions work in our workplaces. So for example, there's studies that show that if you advertise a job and you put on it in big block letters, salary negotiable, and you tell all of your hiring managers to expect to negotiate with all of the candidates, then women are more likely to negotiate, and they're less likely to get dinged for doing it. So you haven't told anybody that they're biased, but you've changed the process to mitigate for human error and human bias. If you are hiring for a position and you make sure that 25% of the applicant pool is women, women are more likely to get hired. Without telling your hiring managers, you're biased, you need to hire more women, to which they will defend, you change the process so the subconscious cue is, there's a critical mass of women in this pool, women are legitimate candidates for this pool, for this position. The other way to interrupt the bias warmly is to challenge it without naming it. So the other thing that happened at my family dinner table, my parents asked the normal questions that we all ask about, what did you learn in school today, and who did you hang out with today? And my father used to ask, did you get in trouble today? And he wanted a yes. Because he had 3 girls. He was interrupting the bias that said girls are supposed to be nice. He wanted us to know, without telling us, it was okay to speak up, stand up, for the right reasons. I often tell my coaching clients who are applying for jobs that have a lot of travel and long hours to address the bias without naming it. Because when you're interviewing with somebody, the last thing you want to do is tell them, oh, by the way, you're biased, and so I'm gonna set you right before I keep going. But you know that no matter the man or woman on the other side of that interview table, they likely have a subconscious bias about women, and especially about mothers. And so I often coach my clients to say something to the effect of, I'm really excited about this position, and I have all of the personal support at home to do the kind of travel and long hours that I know this position requires to be successful. So you're countering the bias without naming that person as biased. The fabulous thing about all these little interruptions is, of course, they add up to major change. So when I was playing basketball, there were girls and coaches and parents and principals all across the country interrupting the bias that girls couldn't play. And over the span of 20, 30 years, that caused a sea change in the way in which the opportunities girls had to play and the way in which people see women athletes. And in 1997, I got an opportunity to go to the very first Women's National Basketball Association game in Los Angeles. And my husband and I and a couple of his law school classmates went to the Los Angeles Forum where the Lakers played, the historic forum. And we got our nachos and our Slurpees, and we wandered up into the stands to watch the players warm up. And then, as that finished, we stood up for the national anthem. And I started crying. And I couldn't stop. My husband was like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm okay. I said, I realized that if we ever have a daughter, which we did, she'll grow up in a world where there was always a Minnesota State high school basketball tournament for girls, where there was always a Women's National Basketball Association. And it may not be perfect, but it's better. And I played my tiny little part in that, along with a whole bunch of other people that I wasn't even aware of doing stuff. And that's the power of all of those actions when we take them together. So now it's time for us to get powerful. I want to give you another opportunity at your tables to identify an action. Because the other thing we know about human nature is we're more likely to do something if we get specific about it, if we have a time frame on it, and if we tell other people about it. And so I'm going to make a very specific ask of you right now. You've had, for some of you, 24 hours, or at least today, of fabulous conversations at this conference. This is like the ultimate family dinner table space they've created for you guys, right? And you've had all these conversations, and the power comes when all 235 plus of us do something, even just one something in the next 7 days. Well, by next Thursday, that's your deadline. I would like you to identify one action that you're going to take in the next 7 days. Maybe you want to connect with somebody that you met at the conference and talk about creating a family dinner table space for each other and for some other women. Maybe you want to spend some time with Dr. Verna's materials and think about your purpose. Maybe you want to share some of the research that I talked about today with your human resources department, your organization. All this stuff is up on my website. It's easy to find. Maybe there's an insight from another speaker today that you want to make sure that you follow through on. Whatever it is, we're going to identify one thing that you're going to do by next Thursday, and you're going to share it with the other people at your table. And because this is an action conversation, it's going to be a stand-up meeting. I'm a big fan of stand-up meetings to make things go quickly. So you have 3 minutes, stand up. Everybody needs to have one action at the end of that 3 minutes. Ready, set, go. Stand up, stand up. We're in action mode. Now, if you really want to make sure that you do it, you will share it with all of us right now. Volunteers who want to take advantage of the opportunity to share their action item. Yes?
We are going to network. We're creating a similar field.
Great, the two of you are going to work together to create a family dinner table space for some women. Fabulous! Love it. By next Thursday. First step, okay? All right, another action item. Come on, this is your opportunity to make sure that you do it, because if you share it with us...
Write down my goals.
Huh? What is it?
Write down my goals.
Write down goals, right. Write the goals down. I wrote that over here too. Write down goals. Another action item. Yes?
Define my own success.
Yes.
Define what that really means to me.
Yes.
Everyone else.
Another action item. Yes.
Our table, several of us have teen daughters, so we decided we wanted to share this with them, share our experience here, especially the YouTube video of, Am I Beautiful? Just to kind of give their perspective of this, something that you see and something that somebody that you know may be putting out on YouTube. That's kind of alarming.
Very alarming. So we're going to share it with
our daughters.
Share it with your daughters by next Thursday. All right. Deal. All right, one more action item. Yes.
For those of you that were here last night, we met out in little groups, and one of the groups that I sat in with was how do we stop and avoid cutting other women down. And while we can all be guilty of it at times, I commit to, for the next week, making sure that I build one woman up each day.
Great. One more day. And these are really powerful because they're so specific, right? It's easy to say, oh, I'm going to build up women more often. But one woman a day for the next 7 days, well, then that starts to become a habit. And it starts to become part of who you are, and you'll do it over time, right? So that's really powerful. Thank you for all of the action items. Can you imagine the power of all of these action items and the ripple effect, how many other people you're going to impact? I have a few minutes to take questions, so you can stand or sit. I'm comfortable with you standing, trust me, because it's a long day. But questions? I know Kate has a mic. Yes?
My sister works for the Iowa Girls Union
Yes?
that sets up girls sports and whatnot, and their question every year is, why are there not more women coaches? How can we get women to coach? And I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
Because coaching sucks.
It is.
I'm sorry. That's why I'm so amazed that my dad is still doing it. No, sorry. Coaching is hard, right? Coaching sports is hard, and I think a lot of people think they can do it because they played the sport, right? But that's like anything else. Just being able to do it doesn't necessarily mean you're able to teach it, and especially with young people. So I think that's tough too. I didn't have very many women coaches in my life, and I think that we'll probably be in a better situation now as more and more women are playing, girls and women are playing, and in a position to be able to have the competence part. But it's also the case, like so many other things, that the time in your life when you would coach also coincides with when you have children, right? So either you're coaching your own child, right? I do some coaching. She's not very receptive to my coaching, my daughter, but I try to do some with my daughter. Or you're too busy because you're working and your kids to do the coaching. So I think that's one of the challenges. And anytime I talk to anybody that who wants to get more women involved in stuff is take a look at what's going on in their lives that's preventing them, right? Because a lot of times it's the busyness of it, or it's that they haven't been asked and asked in a way that they can see how to make it possible in their lives, right? Other questions? Yes?
Hi, my name is Lex, and one of the biggest...
On Twitter, yay! I was wondering where you were. I was like, where's Lex?
It's very exciting.
It's so good to meet you, Lex.
Hi, I'm using a microphone. I'm like total participant mode now, but we've been tweeting, and it's nice to meet you in person. This is really fantastic. One of the biggest conversations in the women's leadership community, which I think is both local and national, is how do we engage men? And it's a really tricky thing, and I'm just wondering, I've heard a lot of different opinions, and we don't seem to be talking about men about what would engage them, which feels really hilarious to me. So I'm wondering, I'm just like, it would be a bad dating strategy if you think about it. You know, just like, this is what I think you want.
This is what I think you want me to try.
Yeah, so I would love to hear your wisdom on that.
Yes, I think it's an excellent
And
question.
being advocates for women, I should say. How do we engage
How do we engage men?
Advocates for women.
Advocates for women and advocates to get
Or
rid
for,
of the bias.
or for equity.
Yes.
Or how to make, to know the bias.
Well, I think one of the things is going back to subconscious bias and making them aware of it. So for example, Google trains all of their employees on unconscious bias. Unconscious bias around gender, unconscious bias around race, etc. Because once you tell people that we're all biased, then that's a problem we can solve together. As opposed to creating that us versus them, right? We think men are bad and they're out to get us, that kind of dialogue, which is them defending themselves. And I think that a lot of men today, I would argue most, at the conscious level, just like us, aren't consciously biased against women, right? And so when we go on the attack, they are going to defend themselves because we will do anything to defend our identity of ourselves as not being biased. But we're all biased at the subconscious level. So the first thing I would say is I think we can engage men around the conversation of let's talk about subconscious bias. And let's talk about subconscious bias around gender and race, age, right? There's a lot of bias to go around. And that's a conversation we can all engage in without feeling threatened because you take the intent out of it. I know you don't intend to be biased. I don't intend to be biased either, but we all are. It's human. So let's talk about it. I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing, too, is I think there's a lot of power in engaging our partners. My husband and I, in fact, my book is really about our journey through parenthood, not just mine, and really uncovering the unconscious bias that keep held men back. There's a lot of subconscious bias out there about men as a career person that don't let them take the flexible work hours. My husband went 90% at his law firm and got shunted to the side overnight, right? So there's a lot of subconscious bias about men that holds them back from living the authentic lives that they could lead, the kind of engagement they might want with their children, the kind of work life they might want. And so I think the other way to engage men is to bring that part into the conversation so that we're acknowledging there's bias that's impacting all of us.
We maybe have time for one more question.
Got it all covered, apparently. So I want to thank you. I feel very privileged to be here, very honored to be able to come back home to Mankato and be here with so many friendly faces and so many familiar faces and share some of the things that I've learned. It's just a real great gift to me. I invite you all to share your action items with each other, to share them on Twitter at the YWCA League 2014 hashtag, share them on the YWCA Facebook page, share them on my blog, share them anywhere, because if you share those action items, you will be more likely to follow through and you'll inspire everybody else in this room and anybody else who sees it. So I invite you to share those, and I just want to really say again, thank you so much for having me.